Hello, good afternoon. My name is Mauro Nobili. I teach African history at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. I was trained at the University of Napoli, L'Orientale, in an area studies program in African studies, with a concentration in Islamic studies. And then eventually I refined my skills as a professional historian. Formally I was trained completely in Italy, because I did everything from kindergarten to my Ph.D. in Napoli, but my training basically continued both in Mali, in South Africa, and in a way it continues every time I go in the field working with my African colleague. I've been interested in African cultures in a very undefined way for a long time, since I grew up in neighborhoods that in the 1990s became the neighbors of African migrants in Napoli. More or less at the same time I was in high school and I had a little research program on manuscripts from the parishes of Napoli to detect traces of the 1799 revolution that took place in Napoli when my ancestor kicked out the king for 1 year. They eventually came back and erased the history of this revolution by modifying the manuscripts that were contained in the parishes, especially the one concerning births, death, and other local events. So eventually, when I was studying in my area studies program, Arabic, that was the language I chose, my interest in African history that eventually became in West African history, and this fascinating experience on manuscript kind of came together and pushed me toward the study of Arabic manuscripts from West Africa, in particular in Mali, because I work on Mali. And I think that studying manuscript is extremely fascinating because each manuscript is a unicum. So there is a story behind every manuscript that by studying the manuscript as a text but also as an object, you can kind of try to discover. So every manuscript is a challenge per se, and this is something that basically never makes your work boring. And also it allows us to understand the history of West Africa, or generally speaking of Islamic Africa, from an internal angle, while for a long time African history has always been taught from the point of view of foreigners, be them Europeans, explorers, or Arab chroniclers and geographers. And a little bit of background about my participation in this workshop. Actually, I think it's important because I've been involved in organizing this workshop since day, I would say, 0, not even 1, because I had the first discussion with some of the organizers even before I got the job at the University of Illinois during my trip to the United States from South Africa, where I used to teach and do research before 2014 when I moved to the US. So during my interview we had also like a little session thinking on how I could have contributed to this workshop. But I think it's been an interesting opportunity to share what I learned, to learn a lot, and most importantly to create with both American-based scholars and African scholars, both those that I knew before and the one that I did not know before. So starting to create a working group that I'm pretty sure in the future will continue improving the discipline that is basically coming out from this kind of efforts.
So hi, my name is Dmitry Bondarev, and I'm reading it from this list. So my institution affiliation is University of Hamburg. I work there at the Center for the Study of Manuscript Cultures. My background is linguistics, African linguistics, and with interest in one particular language in West Africa, which is Kanuri, I got involved in research on the Quran manuscripts with annotations in that language. And this is a variety of Kanuri called Old Kanembo or Tarjumo. So, and then the other question, whether I taught the discipline in the country I was born. I was born in Ukraine, grown up in Russia. So in biological terms, I didn't taught in Ukraine, but I did teach some African studies in Russia before I moved to England. And then all other countries where I taught anything was outside, definitely, of the place of my birth.
How about your own training?
My own training?
Yeah.
Oh, in
manuscript.
I started. My background was linguistics, so I did my master's and Ph.D. at the University of St. Petersburg in Russia. My first language, African language to which I was exposed was Hausa. Then with Hausa I switched to Kanuri, and then I did a PhD based on a disciplinary connection between the manuscript sources from the Kanem-Borno Empire and symbols of power in Kanuri, as recorded in Kanuri, in the language of Kanuri. And when I moved to Britain, I found that there was the author of a very famous publication in West African Studies by that time, David Bevar, was still in Britain, and David Bevar published an article in 1960s about so-called Borno Qurans, and that was the only source by 2001 that had anything about Kanembo or Kanuri as written language going back as far as the 17th century. So in London I met Bevar, and it turned out that he had all the material photographed on microfilm from his former job as at the Department of Antiquities, of the then Department of Antiquities in Nigeria, with him on microfilms and on printed copies, and that's where my project started on Nigerian Borno Qurans. And so that was the crucial point when I became interested in manuscript studies and Islamic manuscript studies. So that was the vehicle that took me from pure linguistics to manuscript studies and then to Islamic manuscripts. So you're also welcome to help me with the questions if I can't read it quickly. About Ajami manuscripts, I can add that with the study of manuscripts from larger Borno area, I got interested in other manuscripts written in Arabic script, but with non-Arabic languages, with African languages of Africa. And so now we have several projects that cover the area from Senegal to Chad in relation to so-called Ajami manuscripts. What do I enjoy most about the study of African manuscripts? Well, the most enjoyable part, I must confess, is when you have your digital copy of your manuscript on your screen, and nice environment where you can only concentrate on that page and try and understand what is written there. And I think that's the most rewarding part of research. Sometimes it's very rare. Not well these days. It's not the most often part, the most common part of my day. But whenever I have time, I still do it exactly that. Well, importance of Ajami study is really great. It's really big in my view. Well, not only because it was understudied until recently, but because the more we look at the material written in Arabic script, in African languages, in Arabic script, the more we understand the complexity behind the relationship between the Arabic as a medium of education and Islam in West Africa, and the local settings. So it's not only just linguistic relationship between Arabic and Arabic language and non-Arabic languages, but it's the potential of seeing the whole socio-linguistic, socio-cultural complexity behind Islamic education in the whole of West Africa. So that's the most important thing. And since it does have a potential of reconstructing so many different levels in the society, that it really well, the importance, the more we think about it, the great importance of it we appreciate. So for the study of African manuscripts, I think the future is pretty bright, because for the last 10 years or more so, the interest in African manuscript has grown substantially. So I can only see that the interest develops almost now every month, and with many projects that we've been doing, and with all the colleagues who've been doing the projects on African manuscripts, we only see the increase of interest and awareness of everyone of all important stakeholders, publics, universities, academics who see now the importance of being involved in this project. So I think we're on the good track now, on the good road to a very bright future. So with this workshop, one of the the insights, so the question about the insights about the from the workshop, I think that well, there are many, and one of the interesting output of the workshop, as I can see it, is the even high interest in what is going on in the studies of African manuscripts from the public, from the specialists professionally doing their work in Islamic studies or museum studies or archives, library studies, etc., anthropology, history of Islam, etc., who really for the first time could appreciate the details or the background of Islamic cultures in West Africa. So I think the most important from this part of this component, that we have a potential of wider networks and to bring people, well, for further development of joint collaborative research. So this is one kind of potential output. Then on the side of the participants coming from Africa, it was very interesting to see the level of engagement of the African curators in the work they've been doing, and the level of the presentations was very good, very informative. So it showed that that at local level, well, local, I mean in the level of the countries from where they were coming, there had been some good experience and some good knowledge has already been gathered, so that they were in the position to describe their collections, their concerns about their collections, the content of their manuscripts at a very professional level, and linked together now with this growing community of the academics and librarians from the States or from the European universities, and having this potential of expertise from African countries, it really gives a very positive insight into the collaborative work on about the Islamic African manuscripts at large. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Susana Molins-Lliteras from the University of Cape Town in South Africa. I began my education in the US. I did an undergraduate degree in literature and in philosophy, and it was specifically Francophone literature with a specialization in Francophone literature in Africa. After that, I did a year of Fulbright here in Morocco, and already from that stage, what I really was interested in was some sort of African studies, but I wasn't really sure what exactly. And my journey actually took me from literature, from philosophy to history, and that was through a very long route. But it began in a strange way when I first was studying literature. One of my favorite African authors was Amadou Hampâté-Bâ from Mali, and I had this burning desire to actually get to know Mali as a country. And when I was living in Morocco, I was living in Fez, and we went for a visit to Marrakesh, and I was very fascinated. I saw the sign, 365 camel days to Timbuktu. And I thought, well, I need to do this. How am I going to actually get to Timbuktu? And about a year later, I got married, and I said, well, for my honeymoon, I want to go to Mali. I want to get to Timbuktu. And I did. I got to Timbuktu in my honeymoon, and afterwards, a month later, I settled in South Africa. I went to the University of Cape Town. I enrolled in a master's program in African Studies, and I started to look to work with a scholar there. And well, after quite a search, I ended up finding Shamil Jepi, who had just started a project on Timbuktu manuscripts. So that's how I ended up in this field of African manuscripts. And for me, well, I mean, I think much has been said of the importance of this field, but to me, Islam in Africa has always been relegated almost in a secondary, as a secondary field. From the one hand, within African studies itself, it's almost as if the whole of Islamic Africa is considered not real Africa, while on the other hand, from the field of Islamic studies, then African Islam is looked at as something that's not orthodox or not real Islam. So it's doubly marginalized within our fields of study. So for me, this is why it's really crucial for us to get away from some of these preconceived notions, and one way of doing it is through the manuscript culture. From this workshop, I will take home with me, I think, two main aspects. One is I'm very pleased to see the growth in the interest that this field has created in the last, I would say, 10 years, because when I first started, there was really a handful of students studying any of these manuscripts. You could count them with one hand. And now I met a huge number of graduate students doing fascinating work. So that's the one thing. And the other aspect is the importance of including the African curators in any sort of workshops and programs, because there's the same thing that our project really values, is that without the people that actually handle these manuscripts every day, that read them every day, as scholars, we will only get a tiny bit of the actual importance and insight into them. So it's that collaboration is crucial, and I think this workshop really succeeded in bringing those aspects together.
So my name is Bruce Hall. I am in the history department at University of California, Berkeley, where I've just moved after spending 9 years at Duke University. I am a historian, an Africanist historian. I have a Ph.D. from the University of Illinois, where I spent many years, on and off. I am originally from Canada, so I moved to Illinois from Canada to do my Ph.D. Why did I not do it in Canada? Because I wanted to work with Arabophone materials in Africa, and when I was looking for programs to do that, there weren't very many, and there were none in Canada. So Illinois was one of the places where that was possible, and so that's how I found myself in Illinois. How did I become interested in the study of African Arabic or Ajami manuscripts? Well, I was always interested in Africa. I have no natural connection to it, family connection, except I did have cousins who had lived in Africa who were older than me, so I had some sense of the continent as a place, an exciting place to go, or an exciting place to learn about. I went to the University of Toronto as an undergraduate, and that was a very large university with a huge multicultural, cosmopolitan student body. And I was introduced to Africa through sort of student activism and politics of the third world and these kinds of things. And I decided that life was short and I needed to get out of the classroom and go and see the world a little bit. So after my freshman year at the University of Toronto, I went to West Africa, backpacked around, and I either had so much fun doing that or felt like it was an incomplete trip that I did it again after another couple of years. So I spent 2 years sort of traveling independently in Africa while I was an undergraduate. And I was always interested in religion, and I was also interested in the Middle East, and I'd studied Arabic as an undergraduate. And after I finished, I went to Cairo to study Arabic in Cairo. And so I wanted a place where I could both follow my interest in Africa with my interest in Arabic, Islam, those sorts of things. What do I most enjoy about the study of African manuscripts? They're very hard to read. I feel like I put a lot of time in, I did my dissertation research in Timbuktu in Mali, when it was still possible to do that. And I spent a long time there. So I spent many, many hours working through these materials and trying to understand them and, learning the tricks of the calligraphy and all those sorts of things. And I don't think I ever got to the bottom of the everything, of course. But it was rewarding to, it didn't feel always rewarding to do it, but I think in the long run it was rewarding to be able to get from where I started to the point where I was able to use those materials for my own historical research. And so for that I feel some gratification. But I often, sitting in Timbuktu in 120 degrees, thought, the world needs a good historian of the Seychelles or someplace more than northern Mali. So I don't know that my choice wasn't in a crowded field, let's just say. I think it's a really important field to study. This is a very important aspect of African history. It's not very well known. It's known sort of as a symbol rather than in terms of the content of the intellectual tradition in Muslim West Africa. And I think it's often misrepresented for good reasons and bad. But I think that the material itself is worth the effort to get to know. And what's the future of the study of African manuscripts? I have been very critical of the way in which, especially in Mali, Arabic manuscripts have been turned into a kind of fetish almost, some sort of thing which represents to donors and to outsiders something which, it sort of is the inversion of what Africa is supposed to be or not supposed to be. And the play on this, I think, has been detrimental to the development of this field, actually. I think that far too little work is actually done on reading the manuscripts. Far too much is done on talking about them as a symbol. And I think that the real future lies in Africans themselves working on these materials. And I think it's something that in Mali has always been difficult because this is a country with a European colonial language of French. And people who know Arabic didn't go through that French colonial system for the most part, and vice versa. The people that won't go through the French system don't have the Arabic skills. So even for people who have really deep knowledge of the manuscripts, it's hard for them to find professional positions, it's hard for them to get Ph.D.s, it's hard for them, or they do it in the Arab world and it's hard for them to then find a position back home, or, there's a lot of linguistic issues that get in the way. But I'm encouraged, I think, that there is a growth in Arabic language education in countries like Mali and in a lot of Muslim West Africa, and I think there are a lot more people, younger people, who have proved to be quite interesting and have perspectives on this material that I think is exciting. So I think that's one of the places where the future lies. And the insights that I take home with me at the end of this workshop, I just arrived last night, so I have not experienced the whole workshop, but it seems like a great group of folks, and I was pleased to be able to come for at least this last part with the African curators, because what I do has, based at least in part on those relationships with these people. So it's some of them I know already, some of them I didn't know before this morning. So it's a privilege for me to be able to be here.
My name is Graziano Krätli. I work in the Yale University Library System. More specifically, I work in the Divinity Library, and my title is Digital Projects and Technology Librarian, which means I'm mostly involved with digitization projects and related issues. As a librarian, I was trained in the United States. All my previous academic background happened in schooling, happened in Italy, which is my home country, but I went to school to become a librarian in the United States. So professionally, I was trained here in Chicago, actually, and even if I work in the digitization project, I'm not involved in the digitization of any African Arabic manuscripts because they are not part of the collection of the Divinity Library. However, my interest in West African manuscripts started at the very end of my library program. I could not find the course. I had to finish the program. I needed one more course, and I couldn't find anything that interests me, so I suggested an independent study to write a little paper on Mauritanian manuscripts, and I was lucky that I found a faculty member who was very helpful and said, I will be your advisor. So that the goal was a dual goal, was to finish the program with this little thesis, but also to turn, after the graduation, to turn the little thesis into an article and to publish that article. That happened. It became actually a 2-part article. At that point, I was ready to forget and move on with my work as a librarian, but then from that article, another article came, then my edited book, then that gave me a lot of visibility, and then I'm invited in a workshop like this. And I find this a very enjoyable field too. I'm very attracted visually. People say that manuscripts on the Islamic heartlands are more elegant, more refined aesthetically. I found West African Arabic manuscripts very attractive in themselves, and I find very interesting the connection with the local culture and traditions. Manuscript is just a way to record information, so in each country it takes a different life based on the local communities, the materials that are available, the environmental conditions. So I very much like that integration of the format with the local realities. I think this is a very important area, field of study. First of all, because as we know, West Africa has been, and Africa in general, has been neglected, especially in regards to the recording, the written recording of history, which was denied at first and then slowly recognized, and then even so it's always like the poor cousin within the larger Islamic world. So you are involved in projects where the focus is on the central Islamic land, Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and then if Africa is mentioned, it's at the very end, and it's with very few elements. So we should emphasize that everything is relative. So for the study of Africa or African history, which in a larger context means the history of the Mediterranean West, it includes Spain, and the southern part of Italy is not Africa itself, but West Africa being tied by commercial links to the rest of the Mediterranean basin and the East is a very important area, not even to mention the slave trade that connects it to the Atlantic and the transatlantic. So, and because it's such an important field, and because it's a field that is still struggling to get itself recognized, but there is a lot of blood being put in, and new energies, I think the future is there. The importance is tied to the future. It's important to make clear that this is a field that has a future. One of the reasons being that it's being neglected for so long, that there is so much work to do. Events like this workshop, what I see is more and more conferences and high quality workshop. This is a typical example. It's very intensive, week-long workshop. I hear announcement of conferences. I heard something is going on in Rabat in November. There is more and more scholars, there are more and more institutions, and there are more and more funding agencies that are contributing. And of course, if you don't have scholars, institution, and funding agencies, there is no way that the field can expand. But this is what is happening. What is happening right now with West African Arabic manuscripts. And what I will take, there is a lot to take back, and I think the best way to summarize the benefits of a workshop or any other event or a conference is how much you think you're going to keep working on based on what you learn. This is a place to learn, but it's also a place to establish connections and to create opportunities to continue working from wherever we are scattered around the world. And that is probably the thing that I appreciate most of this experience. Thank you.
My name is Nuria Garcia Masip. I am a calligrapher from Spain. I trained in Istanbul, Turkey with the traditional classical school of Ottoman calligraphy. And I became interested in the study of African manuscripts through the aesthetic aspect and the importance of studying the calligraphy, the different calligraphy styles present in African manuscripts. And in this conference, I have many different ideas for the future that hopefully we can try to deepen our understanding of these styles and pursue a way of reviving these scripts and making them, having people actually practice these scripts and reviving the arts of the book in the different African countries.
Yeah, okay, so the first question is, what's my name? I will pronounce it the proper way. This is how I know in my home country. It's Darya Ogorodnikova. But actually outside of this region, people usually have troubles with pronouncing, especially my last name, and there's like also different interpretation of the first name. I'm kind of used to it, and I find it actually very nice because then it's a variety and I like choice. But I also have some other names. For example, when I travel to Africa, like for example in Ethiopia, I received the name of Walda Mariam Gizain. And people in East Africa usually know me under the name of Nobili. So now I'm based at the University of Hamburg, and in particular at the Center of the Studies of Manuscript Cultures. I was trained in linguistics first, and then I thought that it's a little bit boring, so I switched to anthropology, and then from then I switched again to applied anthropology in development. And I didn't start a study in my own country because my parents usually thought that I should receive a good education, and they did everything so that I can travel to the university in Russia because they believed it would be a better option for me. And I'm really grateful to them. So first I studied in Russia, in St. Petersburg, and then I spent some time in France. But I mean, I'm continuing studying or learning everywhere, basically. I didn't have, in the beginning, I didn't have any particular interest in Arabic or Ajami manuscripts, even though one of my Arabic teachers told me that since I'm kind of good with Arabic language, I should maybe think of working with Ajami manuscripts. So I think it was a fate. I mean, just I was lucky that once Professor Dmitry Bondarev invited me for working in the project, and I never regretted since. I mean, I'm really happy that I have this possibility to work with him, to collaborate with him, and I'm really fascinated with manuscripts because first of all, I mean, especially for my material, there is not that much manuscripts were known, so then we started like with 10 manuscripts, and then the collection was getting larger and larger. So basically I'm like hunting after those manuscripts, not only in libraries in Europe, but also in African countries. And what I really enjoy about the manuscripts is some sort of like small enigmas that one have to figure out what does it mean, how do I read it, how do I understand it, for what purpose they were using those manuscripts. And I'm really happy with the outcome because at the beginning we had like tiny number of manuscripts, but then it got larger, and now more or less I can see the whole picture behind, and it's kind of getting into shape. And I'm really fascinated with this. So yeah, I think this is pretty much it. Thank you.
My name is Charles Stewart, and I'm an Emeritus Professor in History at the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana, as well as the Director of Programming here at the ISITA unit at Northwestern, the Institute for Study of Islamic Thought in Africa. My training began at the University of Ghana. I did a MA degree at Legon. I think I may have been the second non-Ghanaian student that got a degree at that institution. And then I went on and did a Ph.D, or DPhil as they call it, at Oxford. Did I train in my discipline is one of your questions, and study in the same country in which I was born. I did not study, obviously, Ghana and the UK. And the reason, I think, probably was more tied to the fact that I saw the kind of specialization I wanted to do was going to be best offered at places other than the U.S. institution, the U.S. system. How did I become interested in African Arabic Ajami manuscripts? This is a fairly easy one because at the time I started out, there was a very famous British historian we all heard about, Hugh Trevor Roper, who proclaimed there was no past in Africa in the absence of the written word. So I was arriving in Ghana at the very time that people began to notice, well, wait a minute, here are Arabic materials, people are writing African languages in Arabic. There was a written past, and so I came back. I first was there as an undergraduate student for a year, came back for the MA program, and then went on to make a career out of studying Arabic materials to uncover bits and pieces of the African past. What do I enjoy the most? I think it's the kind of enjoyment we all have in research. It's the quest, it's the search, it's the hunt. Maybe this is some primeval piece of us all that comes out as we move into this area. It certainly, for me, I went off to a pretty remote little corner of southwestern Mauritania as a DPhil student at Oxford, looking for a research topic, thinking that if there was a library there that was descendant from a very famous library in the middle part of the 19th century, maybe there were still people who knew something about it. And I met the great-grandson of the very guy I was interested in, who had spent 30 or 40 years of his career collecting the correspondence, collecting the works written, basically re-establishing the intellectual ambiance of his great-grandfather. And he opened that all to me, and that was kind of the beginning of a career focused on what came out of that library. Subsequently, I was fortunate enough to be able to be asked by the family to come back and microfilm that library, and that library is at the University of Illinois as a resource for the general public. The future for the study of African manuscripts, I think we've moved so far since my first generation, my time when we were just enthralled to find a piece of Arabic writing. And what we were looking for, thanks to Trevor Roper, we were looking for history, any kind of history. Today, the young people I see producing very exciting work are the ones who are getting into the textual analysis, into the interpretive innuendo, the fine fine I'm reminded of a paper just here a couple of days ago that was examining the coding within the Songhai language, interspaced amongst the Arabic texts as a way of elucidating the meaning of a particular piece, probably for teaching purposes. The sheer intellectual weight of this level of sophistication, of linguistic manipulation, is just mind-boggling. And it so outweighs a lot of the facile stuff we talk about. Manuscripts, oh, medicine, oh yes, astronomy. No, let's get into what the manuscripts are about. And what they're about is an incredible intellectual weight that is demonstrated on those pages. And but it's demonstrated for most of us, very uninteresting things like grammar, or counting the number of angels on the head of a pin. I say that somewhat facetiously, but the point is some of the very sophisticated theological works, and the reasoning and the logic, the study of logic itself. I mean, this is an incredibly powerful tool, and in some areas not even encouraged, because it led to questioning what the canon was all about. But studying the study of logic itself would open up a lot of avenues. We're at that level with this literature that we can ask those questions. This is where this generation of students is headed, and I just find it so exciting. I'm sorry I'll be planted by the time most of it comes out. So what insights do I take back from this workshop? I'm really, really pleased with how the workshop has kind of come together, and a lot of heavy-duty planning and laying it out. The outreach of the workshop itself into the Chicago intellectual community dealing with manuscripts, the outreach on this campus, the impact, I hope, down at the University of Illinois as well. But it's the younger people who've come away kind of mesmerized by the possibilities that await them. That's, I think, what I take away as the most inspiring part. I know I can get through it, because it's very emotional. It's the question that comes up: how does a young lad coming out of Elgin, Illinois, get so enmeshed in this world. And it's very, very closely tied. I've found this with other Africanists of my generation, very much tied to the civil rights movement in this country. Why? Because we came out of, in my case, I won't generalize, northern suburbs, no way of contact with the African American world, except for a deep sense of needing to do something, be there somehow. So in the absence of going down and joining the buses, I started writing away saying, how could I, as an undergraduate, go to an African country and serve a year in an African world, be myself a minority in a majority world. And thereby, somehow, I didn't think I had it very well figured out in my mind, be a part of what this struggle is all about back here at home. It turns out that I'm not alone. Yvette Skaman, who used to be a librarian at Illinois, tells me that she came into African studies through the civil rights movement in the same fashion, and I've come across this on the part of a number of other people. So the story about how that microfilming project came about, I had been out of Mauritania for 10 years at least, since the time of my initial field work there. And I got a call from the State Department saying, are you the Stewart who used to be in Mauritania? And I said, obviously any academic is a little suspicious of these things. I said, how did this come about? And they said, well, somebody has walked into our embassy in Nouakchott and they want to find Stewart in America. And that's what led them to me and putting the son of the sheikh I had worked with there, Baba Old Haroun, put the son in touch with me through the U.S. Embassy. And Baba, basically his message was this: we had a major rainstorm, unexpected, in the village. Within the last year, I've seen damage to these manuscripts. I feel for the posterity and what my father and grandfather and great-grandfather had done, they need to be preserved in some fashion. And that's what triggered an application to the NEH, and then a year-long microfilm project. Microfilm project in an area that had no electricity, where occasionally you can see, I joke about this, see the toes of the guy who was making the filming because he had to hold the manuscript down from the whirling wind around him. It's not quite like that. But in fact, it was pretty primitive, the filming itself. I'm surprised to hear people now looking at it saying, not bad, we can read it, because it was not done under professional conditions. Fortunately now, as we know, that the same film is being digitized at the University of Illinois, and it will be much better preserved as a result of the digital format. What it represents is probably one of the largest family libraries in West Africa, and an insight to the daily life, the correspondence, the give Ahmed a camel for the good deed he did to me, for me, lots of very pedestrian stuff alongside real heavy-duty theology and economic census of all of the cattle that belong to the tribe and things like this. So it gives you some feel of the depth of what this literacy, this is not just a passing thing. These are lives that are deeply affected by the literate world in which they're living.
My name's Emelda Lawson Bacall. I work for Northwestern Illinois University, and my training in academic discipline, I would say, I received my master's in inner city studies and education, which normally I guess people would study current issues, but somehow I was able to convince my professor to let me study Arabic literacy and knowledge production during the Malian Empire. And, I picked that subject before I really knew what I was getting into. I didn't realize that I needed to know a lot about West African history, and I actually knew nothing about West African history when I started to write that. So it actually took me quite a long time to finish my, to start on my thesis, because it took me about a year just to get really, to become aware of all of the literature that was out there. And since I was looking at literacy or writing or reading and writing in the Arabic language, some of that literature, it's like I had to dig a bit deep, because this was back in 2010. So actually there's so much more information now, and it's so much more accessible through the internet. So that's sort of how I got into studying African Arabic manuscripts. I guess I wanted to say also about that okay, I'm losing it. I was, as far as what I enjoy about the study of African manuscripts, I think what I enjoy most is connecting to what I will say is my history. I'm an African American, so I'm an African of the diaspora. I'm a Muslim. It connects to that, and I know that there are some both female scholars like Nana Asmu, but I know there's also some female enslaved scribes from the 13th and 14th century that I've read about. So I really want to learn more about their history, because I feel connected to them in a lot of ways. So there's importance to me, like in a personal way, to this field of study, but I feel like this field of study is very important it's important in a lot of ways, but for me it's important in overturning what's still the myths about Africa that still exist. Some of the participants went to the Field Museum yesterday, and it was wonderful. They had some beautiful manuscripts from West Africa, absolutely amazing. Just the calligraphy, the some of the ornamentation that's on there, and I didn't get a chance to read them, but because I'm not quite at that level in Arabic yet. But anyway, what I was going to say is that they weren't on display, to my knowledge, and you sort of wonder, well, why? I mean, they're not cataloged, but what's on display, at least for East Africa, are the animals, and then what's on display for West Africa is the musical instruments. And so I really think it's important not only for researchers to publish this information in journals and books and get it out in that way, but to really, we need to do quite a bit of public education, whether that's working with museums, whether it's working with filmmakers, whether it's the whole gamut of mass communication. We need, that's something that needs to take place, I think, in this field. Okay, so it's future. As far as insights I'll take home with me from this workshop, I'm actually still processing. This was an amazing experience to be able to work with some of the top scholars in the field, to be able to connect with scholars from both the American continent, from Europe, and it's most especially from the local scholars, from Mauritania to Mozambique. I mean, we covered, West, Central, East, and South, that was just priceless. I don't know. wrapping up. So.
My name is Wendell Marsh. I am a graduate student at Columbia University, but I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm in African Studies, but I consider what I do to be really kind of philology, kind of a new philology. My department is very interdisciplinary, so it's historical, it's textual, but it's also about the politics of knowledge production as well. For the most part, my kind of university training has been, at Columbia, but I've done a lot of language study in Egypt, in Morocco, in Senegal, and in Jordan as well. I first became interested in Arabic in Africa and Ajami, really kind of through African American intellectual history, so especially people like Du Bois, who have an interest in the medieval, early modern kingdoms, empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. So from high school, had an interest in that, and really, I think as my advisor once said, for a lot of Black American intellectuals, Islam is an impassable horizon, so, and for me that certainly has been the case. But yeah, it was kind of reading specifically on like the Tarikh al-Fatash and the Tarikh al-Sudan, and seeing just other sources for African history in Arabic made me interested from the age of maybe 17, 18. I think this is a really important field of study. Not simply because of what it represents, like the missing chapter, but also these are contemporary issues, and these are resources for thinking through the present day. It's not just something of the past. So I think we're in a moment where the field is expanding, but also there's we have to be thoughtful and careful, because there is an industry aspect to it, and we need to be reflecting about the politics, as well as the actual things that we're studying.